Is to do the front and rear shocks on this truck. Part numbers are in the description. First, you need to jack the truck up right here. It's important for when you're putting the shocks on the back to know that you need to jack it up by the frame first. So just right here under this bed mount, jack it up, and then take the wheels off. I'm showing the plastic covers because everybody breaks plastic covers. So you take the plastic covers off with a regular socket first, and then do the lugs, which y'all know how to do. And then, so you jack it up all the way, put a jack stand under right where the leaf connects in that saddle right there, and then drop the truck down onto the jack stand. And this is important for later on. Right here below the leaf mounting point is where the shock bolt's on. Just unloosen this bottom bolt or bottom nut. Go ahead and take the nut and the washer off. Now up here at the top, as you can see right where it's pointing under the frame, there's supposed to be 2 bolts at the top of this shock tower, or at the top of this shock. There are only one in mine because it's broke, and that's one of the reasons I need to replace it. And as you can see here, actually the new shock is shorter than the stock one because it is a lower truck. So you go ahead and you slide it onto the bolt on the bottom after you've taken the old one off, and then you see that it is actually too short with the truck all the way, the suspension all the way loose. So right here is where you press the jack, and then you look between the bed and the frame. Right there is where that clip is. You can see the top of the shock when you start jacking up under the axle, and it'll start jacking it up, and you can see through that gap right here when it reaches the top. While you're jacking up, you can then put the bolts in once you've got it lined up after you've jacked it up. Here I just hand tighten them, and you do need to tighten them down with a wrench. Obviously, I just didn't film that part. Then go ahead and put the wheel back on. If you know how to put a wheel back on without breaking the caps, just go to about 2 minutes, 30 seconds to see what you need to do for the fronts. But this is just normal lug pattern. Jack it up because it's easier to do the front when the rear wheel is all the way done. So you jack it up, take the jack stand out, drop the truck all the way down. I like to torque everything down and put it all away so I know that I'm completely done with the rear so I don't have to touch it. So then I put the plastic thing back on. This I hand tighten them, and then I use a socket with my hand just to tighten it all the way down so they don't break, because they always break if you use an impact on it. It's right here in the front of the truck after you take the wheel off, right on the upper A-arm right above it. You can see the very top of the shock hanging out right there. What you need to do is get something to grab onto the top. Mine was pretty chewed up, so I just use vice grip pliers to grab it onto the top like this, and then you just start working that bolt on the top or the nut all from the top all the way back, and it kind of takes a minute because this is the only method you can because the top's all messed up. So you just go ahead and back it all the way off. And you go to the underside of the lower A-arm, and you see where the shock bolt's right there. It's just 2 bolts. They come out really easily. The part that gets frustrating after this is after this 2 bolts are removed, there's 2 parts that make it, if you don't know it, then it can frustrate you pretty badly. So when you pull this shock out, you'll notice that when we put it next to the new one's actually a lot thicker. So first you take the top bolt. It actually has 2 bolts on the top when you get it. You take 2 bolts off the top, that top washer, and the top grommet off like this. And then when you slide it in this hole, it actually doesn't fit. So what you need to do is you slide the clips over so that the actual shock will go up inside of the hole, and I had to use a wrench to pop that one to the side. And see, now it'll slide in. So what you're trying to do is get it all the way to the top, and then the top of the shock is you're trying to feed it back through that hole that's at the very top where you originally were unloosening the bolt. That's you're trying to get it to feed through there right here so you can have the new part hanging out at the top, so you can put one of those bolts on it to hold it in place while you're doing the bolts on the bottom. The bolts on the bottom is what's the second part that is kind of frustrating if you aren't used to doing these kinds of shocks, because you can see the bottom, there's openings on the end, so the shock will slide out if you tighten one side down too much. So you see I go about 3 turns on each side, go back and forth, so that the shock doesn't slide out from behind the bolt. So once you do that, you go ahead and take that bolt that you had on the top off, because what you're doing is removing the old washer and the old grommet that's probably still stuck in there, and then putting the new grommet and the new washer on it. and you go ahead and put the first new bolt on it. And then I use the like an adjustable wrench to hold the top, because this one's not all chewed up like my old one was. But you get an adjustable wrench, you make it so it'll fit so it spans the top of the shock, and then you just get a wrench and you just work it down until it has a lot of resistance. It'll have a little bit of a resistance while you're compressing it. So once you got it all the way down, as you can see, it took a minute. You put the second bolt on, or the second nut on, and you screw it all the way down, and then you get 2 wrenches and you tighten the top bolt and the bottom bolt together to kind of lock them in place. See, one on the bottom, one on the top, and you just turn the top one until it is completely snug hard against the bottom one, and that kind of locks it in place. And then you just put the wheel back on the same way that you put the rear one back on, and that should be it. So if there's any questions, feel free to comment. Thank you.